The assessment chamber hummed with alien technology as Maya-chan stood before the council of evaluators. Three beings from different species sat behind a crystalline desk that seemed to float in midair. The Zephyrian's translucent wings flickered nervously. The Corvin's metallic exoskeleton gleamed under harsh lights, and the human representative avoided eye contact entirely. Maya had trained for this moment her entire life. Every human child dreamed of being selected for the Galactic Hunter Academy, the prestigious institution that produced the elite warriors who protected civilized space from the monstrous entities that emerged from dimensional rifts. The Academy accepted only the most exceptional candidates, those who demonstrated extraordinary potential in combat, strategy, or specialized skills. Maya-chan, Terran designation 7749 Delta, the Zephyrian announced, its voice creating harmonics that made her teeth ache. You have completed the initial assessments. Your physical capabilities rank in the 73rd percentile, your tactical reasoning scores place you in the 68th percentile, and your psionic potential registers at 12th percentile. Maya's heart sank. She knew those numbers were mediocre at best. Around the galaxy, beings with far superior natural abilities competed for the same spots. The crystalline beings of Zirian could manipulate matter at the molecular level. The warrior clans of Drakmor possessed strength that could crush steel. The psychic adepts of the Mentari Collective could predict enemy movements before they happened. The Corvin evaluator's mechanical voice clicked, and word. Based on standard metrics, your placement recommendation is Hunter Class designation. Failed. The word hit Maya like a physical blow. Failed. Not even the lowest combat class or support division. Complete failure. However, the human representative finally spoke. Dr. Marcus Webb, a former Academy graduate himself, there is one alternative. Given your unique background and the Academy's commitment to diversity, we can offer placement in the experimental tracking division. It's technically a hunter class, though success rates are historically low. Maya straightened her shoulders. Her grandmother had always told her that humans succeeded not because they were the strongest or fastest, but because they refused to give up. I accept. The Zephyrian's wings stopped flickering. You should understand that the Experimental Tracking Division has never produced a successful graduate in its 47-year history. The program involves direct exposure to Class 5 and above entities without conventional weapons or armor. Previous participants have either been killed, driven insane, or suffered complete psychological breakdown. What exactly would I be doing? Maya asked. Dr. Webb activated a holographic display showing various monstrous creatures. Tentacled horrors with too many eyes, shadow beings that seem to devour light itself, massive insectoid creatures with razor-sharp limbs, and things that hurt to look at directly. Traditional hunting relies on force, technology, and overwhelming firepower, he explained. The Experimental Tracking Division operates on a different theory. Some xenobiologists believe that these entities respond to patterns of behavior and communication that we haven't yet understood. Your job would be to study them up close, attempt to establish communication protocols, and develop nonviolent containment methods. Maya studied the display. Each creature looked capable of tearing her apart without effort. The Academy's regular graduates went after these things with plasma rifles, energy shields, and tactical support teams. The experimental division apparently expected her to walk up to them and try to have a conversation. The survival rate is 0%, the Corvin added helpfully. The survival rate so far, Maya corrected. Has anyone tried approaching this from a completely human perspective? The three evaluators exchanged glances. In the 47 years since humanity joined the Galactic Federation, humans had developed a reputation for unpredictability. They were the species that had somehow survived on a death world, developed space travel from primitive technology in an impossibly short time, and consistently found solutions that defied conventional wisdom. No, Dr. Webb admitted. Previous candidates have all tried to apply traditional xenobiological frameworks. Maya nodded. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory again. Humans had survived everything from ice ages to plagues to their own tendency towards self-destruction. They had domesticated wolves into dogs, turned wild horses into companions, and somehow convinced cats that living with humans was their own idea. When do I start? The Academy's experimental tracking facility was located on Titan Station, orbiting Saturn in humanity's home system. Maya had expected some kind of advanced laboratory with gleaming surfaces and sophisticated equipment. Instead, she found herself in what looked like a converted warehouse with basic observation chambers and minimal safety protocols. Her instructor was Dr. Yuki Tanaka, a middle-aged human woman whose left arm ended in a sophisticated prosthetic. She had been the program's supervisor since its inception and had personally witnessed every failed attempt. "Let me be clear," Dr. Tanaka said as she led Maya through the facility. "This program exists because the Galactic Federation wants to appear progressive and inclusive. They don't actually expect it to work. The other species think humans are interesting as a novelty, but ultimately inferior in any meaningful way." They stopped before a series of containment chambers. Each one held a different entity, secured behind energy barriers that hummed ominously. The previous candidates were all exceptional by galactic standards, Dr. Tanaka continued. Telepaths, combat specialists, genius-level intellects. Every one of them approached these creatures as problems to be solved through superior knowledge or ability. Maya studied the nearest chamber. Inside, a creature that looked like a cross between a praying mantis and a nightmare paced restlessly. Its movements were hypnotic, almost dance-like, and its compound eyes seemed to track her even through the barrier. "What's this one's designation?" "Specimen 23 Alpha. Dimensional Predator, Class 6 Threat Rating. It appeared 3 months ago near the trade routes between Zirian and the Corvin hegemony. Destroyed 4 merchant vessels before we managed to contain it. Traditional weapons were ineffective. It seems to exist partially outside normal space-time." Maya watched the creature's movements more carefully. There was definitely a pattern to its pacing, but it wasn't random or agitated like a caged animal. It reminded her of something, though she couldn't immediately identify what. "Has anyone tried to mimic its movements?" Dr. Tanaka blinked. "Excuse me, the way it's moving, it's not just pacing. It's communicating? Or maybe performing some kind of ritual?" They moved to the next chamber, which held what appeared to be a living shadow with glowing red eyes. It writhed against the energy barrier, leaving traces of darkness that took several seconds to fade. "Specimen 31 Gamma," Dr. Tanaka explained. "Pure psionic entity. It feeds on fear and negative emotions. Killed 6 researchers before containment. The mental shielding in these chambers is the only thing preventing it from affecting us right now." Maya noticed that the shadow creature's movements became more agitated when Dr. Tanaka spoke about its kill count, but calmed slightly when she remained silent. "It responds to emotional states. Obviously, it's a psionic predator." "No, I mean it responds to the emotions we're projecting right now. Look," Maya deliberately shifted her mental state, thinking about her grandmother's garden back on Earth. The peaceful afternoons spent learning about plants and soil and the delicate balance of ecosystems. The shadow creature's writhing slowed noticeably. Dr. Tanaka's prosthetic arm whirred softly as its sensors registered the change. "Interesting. Previous researchers focused on maintaining aggressive mental shields. You're doing the opposite." They continued through the facility, observing dozens of contained entities. Each one had been classified as an existential threat to galactic civilization, and each one had defied traditional hunting methods. Maya began to see patterns that the previous research had missed. "Dr. Tanaka, what happened to your arm?" The older woman's expression tightened. "Specimen 15 Delta. I was the first candidate in this program, 23 years ago. I got too close, thought I understood what I was dealing with. The entity didn't kill me, but it changed my arm into something else. Something incompatible with human biology." Maya nodded thoughtfully. "But you survived." "Barely. And you learned something. I learned that these things are far more dangerous than we imagined. Maya turned back to look at the creatures they had observed. Or maybe you learned that traditional approaches don't work, but you didn't have time to develop alternatives before the incident. Dr. Tanaka was quiet for a long moment. What exactly are you thinking, Maya? I'm thinking that every species in the galaxy approaches these entities the same way. As threats to be neutralized, problems to be solved through force or superior technology. But humans have a different history. We're the only species that domesticated other predators instead of just fighting them. They reached Maya's quarters, a small but comfortable room adjacent to the research facility. Dr. Tanaka handed her a datapad containing files on every previous attempt in the program's history. Read these tonight. Understand exactly how many ways this can go wrong before you decide how to proceed. Your first live interaction is scheduled for tomorrow. Maya spent hours reviewing the files. The previous candidates had indeed been impressive by any standard. Dr. Alexei Petrov, a Russian psychic with combat experience against psionic entities. Captain Sarah Mitchell, former military specialist in xenobiology. Dr. James Park, whose IQ had tested in the top 0.1% of the human population. All of them had failed, but Maya began to notice something interesting in the detailed reports. Each candidate had made initial progress. The entities had responded to their presence, shown changes in behavior, demonstrated what might have been curiosity or interest. But in every case, the human had eventually tried to establish dominance or control, treating the interaction as a problem to be solved rather than a relationship to be developed. Maya's personal tablet chimed with an incoming message from her grandmother back on Earth. Maya, sweetheart, I saw the news about your academy placement. I know it's not what you hoped for, but remember what I always told you about the wild animals on the farm. The ones that bit and kicked were usually just scared. The key was never to fight them, but to help them understand that you weren't a threat. Maya smiled. Her grandmother had never met an animal she couldn't eventually befriend, from feral cats to aggressive geese to a supposedly untrainable horse that had become her favorite riding companion. She had a talent for seeing past the fear and aggression to understand what an animal actually needed. The next morning, Dr. Tanaka led Maya to Containment Chamber 7, which held one of the smaller and theoretically less dangerous entities. It looked like a cross between a large spider and a sea anemone, with dozens of writhing tentacles that ended in what might have been sensory organs. Specimen 19 Beta, Dr. Tanaka announced. Class 4 entity, primarily defensive rather than aggressive. It secretes a paralytic toxin when threatened, but hasn't actually killed anyone. This seems like the safest place to start. Maya studied the creature through the energy barrier. It was beautiful in an alien way, with iridescent coloring that shifted and changed as it moved. The tentacles moved in complex patterns, sometimes coordinating with each other, sometimes moving independently. What's its natural habitat? Unknown. It appeared near a mining station in the Vega system. The miners reported that it seemed to be examining their equipment rather than attacking. Maya nodded. A creature that examined rather than attacked. That was promising. I want to go in without any weapons or defensive equipment. Dr. Tanaka's eyes widened. Absolutely not. The paralytic toxin alone could kill you, and we don't know what other capabilities it might have. The previous candidates all went in with protective gear and weapons, right? And the creature responded to them as threats. Because they were threats. These things are dangerous, Maya. Maya thought about her grandmother's approach with scared animals. Never corner them. Never make them feel trapped. Always give them an escape route. Show them that you're not a predator. What if the protective gear is part of the problem? What if these entities can sense hostile intent or defensive postures? Every report mentions that the creatures became more agitated when the researchers tried to assert control. Dr. Tanaka was quiet for a long moment, her prosthetic fingers drumming against her leg. If you go in there without protection and that thing kills you, this program gets shut down permanently. And if I go in there with weapons and armor and It reacts the same way it reacted to everyone else. The program continues to have a 0% success rate. Maya looked through the barrier at the creature again. It had stopped moving and seemed to be watching them, its tentacles swaying gently like sea grass in a current. Give me one chance to try something different. If it shows any signs of aggression, I'll retreat immediately. Dr. Tanaka stared at her for a long time. Finally, she activated her communication device. Control, this is Dr. Tanaka. Prepare emergency extraction protocol for Chamber 7. Full medical team on standby. She turned back to Maya. You get exactly 5 minutes. At the first sign of hostile behavior, we're pulling you out. Maya nodded and began removing her standard equipment harness. No weapons, no defensive field generator, no emergency beacon. Just her basic academy uniform and her grandmother's advice echoing in her mind. The energy barrier deactivated with a soft chime, and Maya stepped into the chamber. The creature immediately stopped moving, all of its tentacles focusing in her direction. Maya could feel her heart racing, but she forced herself to remain calm. No sudden movements, no aggressive postures. She sat down cross-legged on the floor, making herself smaller and less threatening. For several minutes, nothing happened. The creature watched her with what she assumed were its sensory organs, tentacles weaving slowly through the air. Maya tried to project the same peaceful mental state she had used with the shadow entity, thinking about quiet gardens and gentle rain. Gradually, the creature began to move closer. Its tentacles stretched toward her, stopping just short of contact. Maya could see now that the tips weren't just sensory organs, but complex structures that seemed to shift and change shape. One tentacle moved closer to her outstretched hand. Maya held perfectly still as it approached, fighting every instinct that told her to pull away. The tentacle touched her palm. The sensation was unlike anything Maya had ever experienced. Not physical contact, but something deeper. Suddenly, she could sense the creature's emotions, alien and complex but recognizable. Curiosity, loneliness, and underneath it all, a deep, abiding fear. This wasn't a monster. It was a lost, terrified being in a place it didn't understand, surrounded by creatures it perceived as hostile. Maya projected feelings of calm and safety, the way she might comfort a frightened animal. The creature's tentacles trembled, and she sensed something like relief flooding through their connection. More tentacles approached, each one making gentle contact with her hands and arms. The creature wasn't attacking or trying to paralyze her. It was trying to communicate, to understand what she was and whether she posed a threat. Through their connection, Maya began to sense fragments of the creature's experience. It had been torn from its home dimension during some kind of catastrophic event. It had been wandering lost through space, desperately seeking something familiar, when a mining station's energy signatures had attracted its attention. The miners had attacked before it could attempt communication, forcing it to defend itself. Maya slowly stood up, keeping her movements calm and deliberate. The creature moved with her, maintaining the gentle contact with its tentacles. She walked toward the chamber's viewing window, where Dr. Tanaka stood with her mouth open in shock. The creature followed, its attention split between Maya and the other humans visible through the transparent barrier. Maya sensed its fear beginning to return as it noticed the larger group of potential threats. She projected reassurance through their connection, trying to communicate that the other humans were not hostile. The creature's tentacles trembled, but it didn't retreat. Dr. Tanaka activated the chamber's communication system. Maya, are you all right? The readings we're getting are unlike anything we've recorded before. Maya looked at the gentle being that had wrapped several tentacles around her arms like a frightened child seeking comfort. I'm fine. Better than fine. Dr. Tanaka, this isn't a predator. It's a refugee. She turned to look at the other containment chambers visible through the facility's windows. Dozens of entities that had been classified as monsters, locked away because no one had tried to understand what they actually needed. And I think most of the others are too. Word of Maya's breakthrough spread through the Academy faster than a dimensional rift alert. Within hours, representatives from every major galactic power had requested detailed reports, and Dr. Tanaka found herself fielding calls from officials who had previously considered the experimental tracking division a bureaucratic formality. Maya remained in Chamber 7 with the creature she had begun thinking of as Echo, based on how it seemed to reflect and amplify emotions. The connection between them had strengthened over the hours, allowing for increasingly complex communication through shared feelings and mental imagery. Echo's story emerged in fragments. It came from a dimension where space itself was alive, where conscious entities lived in harmony with the fabric of reality. A massive conflict between technologically advanced civilizations had torn holes between dimensions, scattering Echo's people across the multiverse. Most had died in the hostile environments of other realities. Echo had survived by learning to exist partially in normal space, but the effort left it constantly exhausted and desperate for the energy signatures that reminded it of home. The mining station's fusion reactors had produced harmonic frequencies similar to those of Echo's native dimension. It had approached seeking comfort and connection, not understanding that the miners would perceive its dimensional abilities as an attack. Dr. Tanaka entered the chamber slowly, moving with the same careful deliberation Maya had demonstrated. Echo's tentacles tensed, but Maya's reassuring presence kept it calm. "The preliminary analysis of your interaction is remarkable," Dr. Tanaka said. "The entity's stress hormone levels dropped by 94% within the first hour of contact. Its energy output has stabilized for the first time since containment. Whatever you're doing, it's working." Maya remained seated cross-legged with Echo's tentacles draped gently across her shoulders like a living shawl. "It's not what I'm doing, it's what I'm not doing. Every other approach has been based on the assumption that these beings are inherently hostile. But Echo isn't hostile. It's traumatized." Dr. Tanaka activated her recording device. "Explain that. Think about it from Echo's perspective. It's been ripped away from everything familiar, thrown into a reality where the basic laws of physics feel wrong, surrounded by beings that attack on sight. Of course it would seem dangerous. A scared, cornered animal is always dangerous, but that doesn't mean it's evil." Echo's tentacles shifted, and Maya sensed a complex mixture of gratitude and hope flowing through their connection. It had never experienced anything like human empathy before, the ability to understand and share another being's emotional state without judgment. "The other entities," Maya continued, "I think they're all in similar situations. Displaced, confused, trying to survive in a reality that doesn't make sense to them. We've been treating symptoms instead of addressing the underlying problem." Dr. Tanaka's prosthetic arm clicked softly as she gestured toward the viewing window. "That's a beautiful theory, Maya, but some of these things have killed dozens of people. The shadow entity alone has left 6 researchers dead." Maya looked through the window at the containment chambers. Each one held a being that had been classified as a monster, but she was beginning to see them differently. The shadow creature that fed on fear was probably desperate for any kind of emotional energy. The crystalline entity that dissolved matter might be trying to reshape its environment into something more familiar. The massive insectoid creature could be following behavioral patterns that made sense in its home reality, but seemed aggressive here. What if we tried a different approach with the others? Absolutely not. Dr. Tanaka's voice was sharp. Echo is a Class 4 entity with defensive capabilities. Some of these others are Class 8 or higher, with confirmed kill counts. The shadow entity doesn't just feed on fear, Maya. It creates fear, generates terror so intense that victims die from psychological shock. Maya felt Echo's distress at Dr. Tanaka's agitation. She projected calm through their connection while considering the problem. What if the shadow entity isn't trying to create fear? What if it's just hungry? Explain. Maya thought about the reports she had read about the shadow entity's attacks. In every case, the victims had been alone, isolated from other sources of emotional energy. The entity had appeared during moments of existing stress or anxiety, then amplified those emotions until they became lethal. A predator that was starving would take any food it could find, even if the act of feeding killed the source. But if we provided a steady, sustainable source of the energy it needs, you want to feed it? I want to understand what it actually needs and find a way to provide that without anyone dying. Maya stood slowly, Echo's tentacles maintaining contact as she moved. But first, I think Echo can help us with the others. Over the next several hours, Maya and Echo developed a communication system that combined empathic projection with basic symbolic concepts. Echo's species had evolved sophisticated methods for sharing complex information through emotional resonance, and Maya discovered that human mirror neurons made her unusually compatible with their communication style. Echo explained that it could sense the other contained entities, recognizing some as beings from similar dimensional backgrounds. The shadow creature was indeed starving, but not malicious. It came from a reality where emotional energy was as abundant as sunlight, and its feeding behaviors were meant to be symbiotic rather than parasitic. The crystalline entity was trying to build something, following construction patterns that were essential to its species' survival. In its home dimension, it would have been part of a collective organism that reshaped matter to create living cities. Isolated and confused, it was still trying to fulfill its biological programming. The massive insectoid creature was actually a juvenile of its species, separated from its hive mind and acting on incomplete instincts. Its aggressive behavior was a defensive response to being unable to sense the guiding intelligence it had evolved to depend on. They're all refugees, Maya realized. Displaced persons trying to survive in a hostile environment. Dr. Tanaka reviewed the data Maya and Echo had gathered. Even if you're correct, that doesn't solve the fundamental problem. These entities are still dangerous. The crystalline being has dissolved 3 containment chambers. The insectoid creature can cut through battleship armor with its limbs. And the shadow entity. The shadow entity kills people because it doesn't understand how fragile we are, Maya finished. In its home reality, the beings it fed on were probably adapted to that kind of emotional intensity. It's like a lion that doesn't understand that humans aren't zebras. Echo's tentacles tightened around her shoulders, projecting agreement and a complex concept that Maya interpreted as something like inappropriate calibration of predation protocols. Even across dimensional barriers, the concept of miscommunication was universal. I want to try establishing contact with the others. Dr. Tanaka was quiet for a long moment. The Academy Board is arriving tomorrow to evaluate the program. If you can demonstrate stable communication with multiple entities, it might change everything. But if something goes wrong, then at least we'll have learned something, Maya said. And Echo will be there to help. They decided to start with the crystalline entity, which Echo indicated was the least likely to react with immediate hostility. Maya spent the evening studying every available report about its capabilities and behavior patterns, while Echo shared what it knew about similar beings from its own dimensional region. The crystalline entity had been contained in a specially reinforced chamber after dissolving through several standard containments. It appeared to be made of living mineral, constantly shifting and reshaping itself while leaving traces of its substance on everything it touched. Maya entered the chamber with Echo at her side, their empathic connection providing a baseline of calm that she hoped would prevent any misunderstandings. The crystalline entity immediately stopped its restless movement, its faceted surface reflecting the chamber's lights in complex patterns. Echo projected greeting concepts while Maya remained still, allowing the new entity to examine them without feeling threatened. The crystalline being's response was immediate and overwhelming, a flood of loneliness and desperate need that nearly knocked Maya to her knees. Through Echo's translation, Maya began to understand the entity's perspective. It was indeed a builder, part of a species that created living structures from crystallized energy. Its entire existence was defined by construction, by the need to create and maintain the architectural systems that housed its people. But here, in normal space, its building materials behaved differently. What should have been stable crystal formations became unstable and dangerous. Its attempts to create safe shelter had been interpreted as attacks on the containment systems. Maya slowly approached the entity, feeling its desperate hope mixed with fear. She extended her hand toward its crystalline surface, and when it touched her skin, the contact created a three-way empathic link between herself, Echo, and the builder. The experience was indescribable. Maya suddenly understood space in ways her human brain wasn't designed to comprehend. She could sense the mathematical relationships between matter and energy that the crystalline entity used as naturally as breathing. She felt its desperate need to create, to build, to fulfill the biological imperatives that defined its existence. But she also felt its growing understanding of her perspective. Through the link, the entity experienced human concepts of fragility and mortality, the way beings like Maya existed in delicate biological forms that could be easily damaged. The entity's surface shifted, creating new patterns and structures. But instead of the random dissolution that had characterized its previous behavior, it began creating something beautiful. Delicate crystalline sculptures that formed and dissolved in patterns too complex for Maya to follow, artistic expressions of concepts that had no equivalent in human language. It was trying to communicate through its art, to share the beauty and purpose that drove its existence while demonstrating that it could create without destroying. Maya spent hours in the chamber with both entities, facilitating communication between them while learning to interpret their very different forms of expression. Echo shared emotional concepts and dimensional mechanics, while the builder created visual representations of mathematical principles and structural relationships. Dr. Tanaka monitored the interaction from outside the chamber, recording data that would reshape xenobiology for generations. Maya's stress levels remained stable throughout the contact, and both entities showed dramatic improvements in their behavioral patterns. Control. This is Dr. Tanaka. She spoke into her communication device. I need you to contact the Academy Board immediately. Tell them we've achieved stable communication with 3 different entity types, and we may have a solution to the dimensional refugee crisis. Maya remained in the chamber as the evening progressed into night, serving as a bridge between 2 alien forms of consciousness that were learning to understand each other. Echo's empathic abilities allowed it to share the emotional content of concepts, while the builder could create visual and mathematical representations of ideas too complex for simple empathy. Together, they began mapping the dimensional catastrophe that had displaced so many beings. The builder's geometric understanding of space-time combined with Echo's emotional memories of the disaster to paint a picture of cosmic tragedy on an unimaginable scale. Entire dimensions had been destabilized by the conflict between advanced civilizations. Billions of conscious beings had been scattered across realities they were never meant to inhabit. Most had died quickly, unable to adapt to alien physics and hostile environments. The survivors were the ones that had somehow made it to this reality, only to be classified as monsters and contained or killed by the galactic powers. Dr. Tanaka, Maya called out as dawn approached. I think I know what we need to do. She stood up slowly, both entities maintaining contact as she moved. Through the chamber's window, she could see the other containment cells holding dozens of displaced beings that might never see their homes again. We need to stop thinking about this as a security problem and start treating it as a humanitarian crisis. Dr. Tanaka nodded slowly. The Academy Board is going to want a full demonstration when they arrive. Are you ready for that? Maya looked at Echo and the builder, 2 impossible beings that had become her friends and teachers over the course of a single day. We're ready, but I think they're going to get more than they bargained for. Outside the facility, Titan Station continued its orbit around Saturn, but Maya knew that everything was about to change. Humanity had always been good at finding new solutions to impossible problems, but this was bigger than anything they had attempted before. She was about to prove that monsters were sometimes just people who needed help getting home. The Academy Board arrived at Titan Station in a convoy of ships representing every major galactic power. Maya had never seen so many different species in one place, from the crystalline Zerions to the energy beings of the Lumina Collective. They filed into the facility's main observation deck with expressions ranging from skeptical to openly hostile. Admiral Corvex of the Drakmor Empire spoke first, his massive frame making the observation deck feel cramped. "We are here to witness your supposed breakthrough, human. The Drakmor Empire has lost 17 ships to these creatures. If this is some attempt to protect them for misguided emotional reasons, you will find us unsympathetic." Maya stood before the assembled delegates with Echo and the Builder flanking her. Both entities had agreed to participate in the demonstration, though she could sense their nervousness through their empathic connections. "Honored delegates," she began, "what you're about to see will challenge your fundamental assumptions about the entities we've classified as dimensional predators. But I ask that you observe with open minds because the implications extend far beyond this facility." She gestured to Echo, whose tentacles created gentle, hypnotic patterns in the air. "This being, designated Specimen 19 Beta in our files, is not a predator. It's a refugee from a dimensional catastrophe that destroyed its home reality." The Zephyrian delegate's wings fluttered dismissively. "These creatures have killed thousands of our people. Whatever sympathetic narrative you've constructed." Echo, suddenly, projected a wave of pure emotion that washed over the observation deck. Maya felt the delegate's aggressive skepticism replaced by a profound sense of loss and displacement, Echo's own experience of being torn from everything familiar and safe. The effect lasted only seconds, but the silence that followed was complete. Maya continued, "Echo can share emotional experiences directly, allowing for communication that transcends language barriers. Through this connection, we've learned that it, and many others like it, are survivors of a conflict between advanced civilizations that destabilized multiple dimensional boundaries." She turned to the Builder, whose crystalline form had been shifting nervously since the delegates arrived. "This entity, designated Specimen 41 Gamma, is from a species of architects that creates living cities from crystallized energy. Its apparent attacks on containment systems were actually attempts to build shelter in an environment where its construction materials behave unpredictably." The Builder's surface began to glow, creating intricate patterns that resolved into a three-dimensional map of local space-time. The mathematical precision of the display was undeniable, showing dimensional weak points and structural instabilities that no current galactic technology could detect. "It's trying to warn us about dimensional collapse points that could threaten inhabited systems," Maya explained. "Its species has been dealing with dimensional engineering for millennia. It knows how to stabilize the boundaries between realities." Admiral Corvex's expression had shifted from hostile to uncertain. "Even if these particular entities are benign, others have demonstrated clear predatory behavior. The shadow creatures are starving," Maya interrupted. "They come from a reality where emotional energy is abundant and naturally renewable. In our dimension, they're reduced to draining whatever sources they can find, not understanding that the process is lethal to us." She activated a holographic display showing energy consumption patterns. "But if we provided a controlled source of the energy they need, similar to how we feed any other refugee population, the predatory behavior would stop." The delegate from the Mentari Collective, a being of pure psychic energy, pulsed with interest. "You propose to domesticate them?" "I propose to help them," Maya corrected. "Just as we would help any displaced population find ways to survive in a new environment without harming the existing inhabitants." Echo and the Builder moved closer to Maya, their alien forms creating a tableau that somehow looked natural and non-threatening. The delegates watched in fascination as the three beings communicated through a combination of empathy, mathematics, and gesture. The question, Maya continued, is whether the galactic community wants to continue treating symptoms with violence or address the underlying problem with compassion and intelligence. The Xerian delegate, a being of living crystal that resonated with harmonics that made everyone's bones ache, spoke for the first time. What exactly are you proposing? Maya smiled, feeling Echo's excitement and the builder's hope flowing through their connection. I'm proposing that humanity take the lead in developing a new approach to dimensional refugees. We establish communication protocols, identify their needs, and find ways to meet those needs without compromising galactic security. And if they refuse to cooperate, Admiral Corvex demanded, then we try harder to understand what they actually need, Maya replied. Humans have a long history of turning enemies into allies, predators into partners. We domesticated wolves into dogs. We turned wild horses into companions. We convinced cats that living with us was their own idea. Echo's tentacles created patterns that Maya had learned to recognize as laughter, and even the builder's crystalline surface flickered in what might have been amusement. We're good at finding solutions that benefit everyone involved, Maya continued. And right now, everyone involved includes dozens of displaced beings that just want to find a way to survive in a reality that doesn't make sense to them. The delegates spent the next several hours observing Maya's interactions with various entities. Each one responded to her approach differently, but all of them showed dramatic improvements in behavior when treated as individuals with specific needs rather than generic threats to be contained. By the end of the demonstration, even Admiral Corvex was grudgingly impressed. The builder had created a detailed analysis of dimensional stability throughout the local galaxy, identifying threats that the Drakmor fleet had been completely unaware of. Echo had shared emotional healing techniques that the Mentari Collective found genuinely revolutionary. Dr. Tanaka stood with Maya as the delegates prepared to leave. The Academy Board has approved expansion of the Experimental Tracking Division into a full department. You'll have funding for 12 additional researchers and access to advanced communication equipment. Maya nodded. Watching Echo play with the builder and what she had learned was a form of multidimensional tag. What about the other entities? The ones that are still classified as maximum security threats. One step at a time, Dr. Tanaka replied. You've proven the concept works. Now you need to prove it scales. Maya looked through the window at the dozens of containment chambers throughout the facility. Each one held a being that had been torn from everything familiar, trapped in a reality they didn't understand, surrounded by creatures they perceived as hostile. Dr. Tanaka, I'm going to need a bigger team. 6 months later, the facility on Titan Station had transformed beyond recognition. What had once been a warehouse with basic containment chambers was now a sprawling complex of specialized habitats, communication centers, and research laboratories. The sterile containment cells have been replaced with environments designed to meet the specific needs of each dimensional refugee. Maya stood in the central coordination hub, surrounded by displays showing the status of 47 different entities that were now classified as residents rather than specimens. Her team had grown from a single failed academy candidate to a diverse group of xenobiologists, empathy specialists, and dimensional engineers from across the galaxy. Echo floated beside her in a tank of specialized atmosphere that more closely approximated its home dimension's energy matrix. Its tentacles created complex patterns as it simultaneously communicated with 3 different entities, serving as a translator and emotional mediator for beings that had never learned to trust aliens. The builder, who had chosen the name Resonance after learning human naming conventions, worked at a crystalline interface it had grown from the station's original structure. The mathematical displays it created had revolutionized galactic understanding of dimensional mechanics. But Maya was more interested in how it had started creating small gifts for the other residents. Delicate crystal sculptures that served no functional purpose except to bring beauty into environments that had been designed purely for containment. Maya, we have a problem, Dr. Sarah Kim announced from her position at the monitoring station. She was one of the new team members, a specialist in aggressive entity behavior who had joined after Maya's success with the supposedly impossible cases. The Corvin hegemony just transmitted new containment protocols for all dimensional entities. They want to transfer them to military facilities for enhanced security measures. Maya reviewed the transmission on her personal display, feeling her heart sink as she read the details. The new protocols classified all dimensional entities as potential weapons, requiring isolation from civilian populations and restricted access for research purposes. They're scared, she realized. The Shadow Fleet incident spooked them. 2 weeks earlier, a group of shadow entities had appeared simultaneously across 3 star systems, draining the fear and panic from a series of natural disasters that had threatened millions of lives. The entities had absorbed so much negative emotional energy that the affected populations had remained calm and organized during the evacuations, resulting in 0 casualties. But the galactic powers had interpreted the entities' intervention as a coordinated attack, proof that the dimensional refugees were organizing into a hostile force. They don't understand that the shadow entities were helping, Dr. Kim said. They saved those people. Echo's tentacles shifted to patterns Maya recognized as deep sadness mixed with frustration. Through their empathic link, she felt its disappointment at how the galactic community had misinterpreted what was meant as a gift. The shadow entities felt the terror and desperation from across space. Maya explained to her team. They responded the same way anyone would respond to a cry for help. But because their help involved consuming negative emotions, it looked like an attack to outside observers. Resonance's crystalline form pulsed with harmonics that translated as urgent concern. The mathematical displays it created showed probability cascades, potential outcomes if the current policy trends continued. Maya didn't need to understand higher dimensional mathematics to recognize the implications. Fear and mistrust were accelerating toward a crisis point that would be devastating for everyone involved. We need to find a way to demonstrate that cooperation is more beneficial than containment, Maya said. Not just for individual entities, but on a larger scale. Dr. James Chun, the team's new dimensional engineer, looked up from his analysis of the latest refugee arrivals. The problem is scope. We've proven the concept works with controlled interactions, but the galactic powers want to see results that impact millions of lives, not dozens. Maya nodded, studying the displays that showed the current status of all known dimensional entities throughout the galaxy. There were now over 200 confirmed refugees scattered across dozens of star systems, most still held in military containment facilities where traditional security approaches guaranteed continued hostility. What if we offered to take them all? The room fell silent. Dr. Kim was the first to speak. Maya, we're talking about entities that have been classified as existential threats. Some of them have kill counts in the thousands. The galactic powers will never agree to centralize them in a civilian facility. Not centralize, Maya clarified. Integrate. We've learned enough about dimensional mechanics to create localized environment bubbles that allow entities to exist comfortably in normal space. What if we established integration sites throughout the galaxy, places where dimensional refugees could contribute to galactic society instead of being locked away from it? Echo's tentacles created excited spirals as it projected enthusiasm through their empathic link. Resonance's crystalline surface began generating new mathematical models, showing how distributed integration points could actually stabilize dimensional boundaries rather than threatening them. Dr. Chun pulled up engineering schematics on the main display. It's theoretically possible. We need massive resource allocation and cooperation from every major galactic power, but the technology exists. The real challenge, Dr. Kim added, is convincing everyone that it's worth the risk. Maya looked around the facility at the relationships that had developed over the past months. Echo had become friends with 7 different entities, serving as an emotional support network for beings struggling to adapt to an alien reality. Residents had started collaborating with the station's engineers, creating structural improvements that made the entire facility more efficient and beautiful. The shadow entities that had been transferred to the facility had formed a collective that actively sought out sources of negative emotion, but instead of feeding destructively, they had learned to provide therapeutic emotional relief to station personnel dealing with stress and trauma. We need to show them what's possible when we stop treating the refugees as prisoners and start treating them as people, Maya decided. Dr. Chun, I want you to design integration habitat prototypes. Dr. Kim, work with the entities to identify the ones most likely to succeed in open environments. Echo, I need you to reach out to every dimensional refugee in galactic custody and let them know what we're trying to do. Over the next month, Maya's team worked around the clock to develop what they called the Integration Initiative. The plan called for establishing 24 integration sites throughout the galaxy, each one designed to accommodate specific types of dimensional refugees while contributing to the local community. Shadow entities could provide emotional therapy and crisis counseling. Crystalline builders could create architectural marvels that were both functional and beautiful. Energy manipulators could contribute to power generation and environmental management. Each refugee would have their needs met while using their unique abilities to benefit the broader galactic community. The proposal was comprehensive, addressing security concerns while demonstrating clear benefits for all parties involved. Maya included detailed behavioral analyses for every entity type, showing how their apparent aggression was actually misdirected survival behavior that could be channeled constructively. Admiral Corvex was the first to respond to the proposal. His transmission was brief and direct, demonstrate the concept on a planetary scale, with measurable benefits to the local population. If successful, the Drakmor Empire will consider supporting expanded implementation. The opportunity came sooner than Maya had expected. The agricultural world of Kepler 442b was facing an ecological crisis that threatened to destroy the planet's food production capabilities. A combination of soil depletion, atmospheric contamination, and invasive species had created a cascade of problems that conventional solutions couldn't address quickly enough to prevent famine. Maya's team arrived at Kepler 442b with 12-dimensional refugees representing 6 different entity types. The local population was understandably nervous about hosting beings they had been taught to fear, but the alternative was watching their world become uninhabitable. Resonance was the first to demonstrate its value. Working with local geologists, it analyzed the planet's underlying mineral structure and began creating crystalline networks that filtered atmospheric contaminants while simultaneously enriching the soil with essential nutrients. The process was unlike anything the colonists had ever seen, as living crystal formations grew through the landscape, transforming polluted areas into gardens of impossible beauty. The shadow entities proved equally valuable in unexpected ways. The ecological crisis had created widespread anxiety and depression among the population, psychological stress that made it difficult for people to work together on solutions. The shadow entities carefully absorbed the excess negative emotion, leaving people calm and hopeful enough to focus on rebuilding their world. Echo and its empathic companions worked with the local mental health services, providing therapy for trauma victims and helping resolve conflicts between different ethnic groups that had been exacerbated by the crisis stress. But it was the energy manipulators that provided the most dramatic results. These beings could directly interface with the planet's electromagnetic field, using their abilities to accelerate plant growth, purify water sources, and generate clean energy for the restoration efforts. Within 3 months, Kepler 442b was not only recovering but thriving beyond its pre-crisis state. Agricultural yields had increased by 300%, atmospheric quality was the best it had been in decades, and the psychological health of the population had improved dramatically. Maya stood in what had once been a contaminated wasteland, now transformed into a park where crystalline trees created living sculptures, while children played safely in gardens that glowed with bioluminescent energy. The dimensional refugees had not just solved the planet's problems, they had made it more beautiful and more alive than it had ever been. The integration model works, she reported to the assembled galactic leaders via holographic conference. But, more importantly, it creates value for everyone involved. The refugees get the support they need to survive in our reality, and we get access to abilities and perspectives that can solve problems we never could have addressed on our own. Chancellor Xerix of the Xerian Collective pulsed with skeptical harmonics. The results on Kepler 442b are impressive, but that world was facing an extinction-level crisis. The population had no choice but to cooperate. How do we know the entities won't become dangerous once the immediate threat is resolved? Maya smiled, feeling Echo's amusement through their empathic link. Because they're not dangerous, Chancellor. They never were. They're just people who needed help, and when we provided that help, they responded the way any grateful person would respond. They helped us back. Admiral Corvex's massive form leaned forward in his chair. What about the entities that refuse to cooperate? Not all of them are as docile as your examples. None of them are docile, Maya corrected. They're intelligent beings with their own wants, needs, and goals. Some of those goals might conflict with ours, just like the goals of any two populations might conflict. But conflict doesn't have to mean violence. She activated a holographic display showing the success rates of different approaches to dimensional refugee management. Traditional containment methods showed a 94% rate of continued aggression and eventual containment failure. Integration methods showed an 89% rate of successful cooperation and community contribution. The numbers speak for themselves. When we treat them as enemies, they act like enemies. When we treat them as potential allies, they become allies. The conference continued for hours as Maya answered questions and addressed concerns from representatives across the galaxy. The dimensional refugees who had participated in the Kepler 442b project joined the discussion, sharing their own perspectives on integration and cooperation. Echo's empathic projections helped bridge communication gaps between species that had never successfully communicated before. Resonance created mathematical models that demonstrated how widespread integration could stabilize dimensional boundaries and prevent future displacement events. But it was a shadow entity named Whisper that provided the most compelling argument for integration. Speaking through a translation matrix that converted its emotional communication into audible language, it addressed the assembled leaders directly. "We understand your fear," Whisper said, its voice carrying harmonics that conveyed deep sadness mixed with hope. "We have been afraid too. Afraid of dying alone in a reality that hurts us, afraid of never seeing our homes again, afraid that we will be forever seen as monsters instead of people." The shadow entity's form shifted, creating patterns that somehow conveyed the emotional experience of loss and displacement more clearly than any words could have. But on Kepler 442b, we learned something new. We learned that we could belong somewhere again. We learned that our differences could be gifts instead of curses. We learned that home is not just a place, but a feeling of being wanted and valued. Whisper paused, its form stabilizing into something that almost looked like a smile. "You have given us hope. Let's give you the same gift." The vote wasn't unanimous, but it was decisive. The integration initiative was approved for galaxy-wide implementation, with funding and support from all major galactic powers. Maya found herself appointed as Director of Dimensional Refugee Services, responsible for overseeing the establishment of integration sites throughout known space. As the conference ended and the various delegates signed off, Maya remained in her office on Titan Station, looking out at the facility that had started as a place of containment and become a home for beings from across the dimensional spectrum. Echo floated beside her, its tentacles creating gentle patterns that conveyed contentment and pride. Resonance had grown a comfortable crystalline chair beside her desk, its surface warm and perfectly shaped to support human physiology. Through the window, she could see shadow entities playing with the station's children, their forms creating dancing patterns of light and shadow that made everyone who watched them laugh with delight. "We did it," Maya said softly. "We actually did it." Echo projected agreement, mixed with anticipation. There was still so much work to do, so many refugees to help, so many communities to convince that difference didn't have to mean danger. But for the first time since she had walked into that assessment chamber and been classified as a failure, Maya felt like she was exactly where she belonged. She was a bridge between worlds, a translator for beings who had never learned each other's languages, a friend to creatures that had never imagined they could have friends. She was humanity at its best, finding ways to turn enemies into allies, monsters into neighbors, and strangers into family. The dimensional refugees were no longer refugees. They were citizens of a galaxy that had finally learned to see them as people. 2 years had passed since the integration initiative launched, and Maya Chun stood before a gathering unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The Grand Assembly Hall on Harmony Station hosted representatives from over 300 species, including 47 dimensional refugee communities that had been successfully integrated into galactic society. The transformation had been remarkable. What had begun as Maya's desperate attempt to save beings classified as monsters had evolved into the largest peaceful cooperation initiative in galactic history. Dimensional refugees weren't just surviving in their new reality. They were thriving, contributing skills and perspectives that had revolutionized everything from architecture to medicine to theoretical physics. Maya walked to the podium, feeling the weight of thousands of eyes upon her. In the audience sat beings of every conceivable form, crystalline entities that reflected rainbow patterns across the hall, shadow creatures that moved like living darkness between the seats, energy beings that flickered with their own internal light, and countless others that defied simple description. Beside her on the stage, Echo hovered in its specialized atmosphere tank, tentacles creating greeting patterns for friends throughout the assembly. Resonance had grown a speaking platform from the station's structure itself, its crystalline form serving as both participant and architecture. "Friends, colleagues, and fellow citizens of our shared galaxy," Maya began, her voice carrying clearly through the hall's advanced acoustic systems. "When I was first classified as a failure by the Academy Evaluation Board, I thought my story was over before it had truly begun." Gentle laughter rippled through the audience, a sound that somehow harmonized across dozens of different species' expressions of amusement. "I had no idea that failure would be the first step toward the greatest success our galaxy has ever known. Not because I proved the evaluators wrong, but because I learned something they hadn't considered. Sometimes the most valuable discoveries come from approaches that seem impossible to those who think in traditional terms." Maya activated a holographic display showing the current status of dimensional refugee integration across the galaxy. The numbers were staggering. Over 1,500 entities had been successfully integrated into galactic society. Crime rates had dropped 34% in systems with active integration programs. Economic productivity had increased by an average of 127%. Most importantly, not a single integration site had experienced the kind of violent incidents that had been predicted by skeptics. "But these numbers only tell part of the story," Maya continued. "The real success isn't measured in statistics. It's measured in the relationships that have formed, the problems that have been solved, and the barriers that have been overcome." She gestured to the audience, where beings that had once been mortal enemies sat side by side, sharing resources and knowledge. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, who lost her arm to what we then called Specimen 15 Delta, is now working with that same entity to develop prosthetic technologies that interface directly with dimensional energy fields. What we thought was an attack was actually an attempt to heal her injury using methods that our medical science hadn't yet developed. Dr. Tanaka stood and waved her new arm, which seemed to be made of crystallized light that moved and functioned better than any mechanical prosthetic could have. The entity responsible, a being of living plasma, now known as Healer, pulsed with visible pride at its successful medical innovation. Admiral Corvex, who initially opposed integration efforts, is now working with shadow entities to provide psychological support for Drakmor warriors returning from combat. His fleet has the lowest rates of post-traumatic stress disorder in galactic military history. The massive admiral nodded approvingly from his specially reinforced seating area, where several shadow entities moved in gentle patterns around him, their presence providing the emotional regulation that allowed him to discuss his experiences without overwhelming stress. Chancellor Xerix has collaborated with crystalline builders to create the most beautiful and functionally advanced cities in Xerian collective space. Architecture that was once purely utilitarian now serves as art that inspires millions while providing superior living conditions. Maya paused, looking out at the assembled crowd with deep satisfaction. But perhaps the most important development has been the discovery that dimensional refugees aren't just survivors of a cosmic catastrophe. They're early warning systems for threats we didn't even know existed. The holographic display shifted to show a map of known space with dimensional instability readings. Red zones indicated areas where the boundaries between realities were becoming dangerously thin, potentially leading to catastrophic dimensional collapses that could destroy entire star systems. Resonance and its fellow builders have identified 17 potential dimensional collapse points throughout the galaxy. Without their expertise in higher dimensional mathematics, we would have had no warning before these areas destabilized. Instead, we now have the knowledge and tools needed to stabilize these boundaries before they become critical threats. Resonance's crystalline form pulsed with harmonics that translated as modest pride mixed with urgent concern. Through their communication interface, it shared complex mathematical concepts that Maya's team had learned to interpret as warnings about even larger-scale threats developing in adjacent dimensional spaces. Which brings me to the real purpose of today's assembly, Maya announced. We've received intelligence about the source of the original dimensional catastrophe that displaced our refugee populations. The conflict that destroyed their home realities isn't over. It's spreading. A murmur of concern rippled through the assembly as the holographic display showed dimensional scan data that painted an alarming picture. Somewhere beyond the boundaries of known space, advanced civilizations were engaged in warfare so destructive that it was literally tearing holes in the fabric of reality itself. The entities we've learned to call the Devourers are systematically destroying dimensional boundaries in their path, consuming the energy released by collapsing realities to fuel their expansion into new territories. Our dimensional refugees were just the first wave of displacement from their advance. Echo's tentacles shifted to patterns that Maya recognized as deep fear mixed with determination. Through their empathic link, she felt its memories of the original catastrophe, the terror and helplessness of watching an entire reality collapse while beings like itself were scattered across the dimensional void. But here's what the Devourers don't understand, Maya continued, her voice growing stronger. They think in terms of conquest and consumption. They see resources to be extracted and territories to be claimed. They don't understand cooperation. She gestured to the diverse assembly before her. Look around this hall. 6 months ago, most of these species had never successfully communicated with each other. Now they're working together to solve problems that none of them could have addressed alone. The Devourers have superior technology and overwhelming force, but they don't have what we have. And what's that? Admiral Corvex rumbled from his seat. Maya smiled. Each other. The holographic display shifted again, showing projected models of what integrated dimensional refugee knowledge could accomplish when applied on a galactic scale. Shadow entities providing real-time psychological support for entire populations. Crystalline builders creating dimensional barriers that could protect star systems from reality collapse. Energy manipulators generating the massive power requirements for galactic-scale defensive systems. The Devourers are coming, Maya announced. Our long-range dimensional sensors indicate they'll reach the outer boundaries of galactic space within 5 years. But instead of facing them as separate species competing for survival, we can face them as a unified civilization that includes perspectives and abilities from across the dimensional spectrum. Whisper, the shadow entity that had spoken so eloquently at the original integration conference, rose from its seat and flowed toward the speaking platform. Its form solidified into something almost humanoid as it activated the translation matrix. Director Chun speaks truth, Whisper announced, its translated voice carrying harmonics of absolute certainty. The Devourers consume not just matter and energy, but hope itself. They spread despair and division, turning potential allies against each other while they advance unopposed. But here, in this place, we have created something they cannot understand or destroy. Whisper's form shifted, creating patterns that conveyed the emotional experience of belonging and mutual support. We have created family across the boundaries of species, dimension, and reality itself. We have learned that difference is not division, but diversity of strength. The Devourers will expect to find a galaxy of separate powers fighting each other for scraps of survival. Instead, they will find a civilization that has learned to turn its greatest challenges into its greatest opportunities. The assembly erupted in sounds of approval that ranged from human applause to crystalline harmonics to shadow entity light displays. Maya felt a surge of pride and hope that she shared with Echo through their empathic link. The integration initiative has given us more than just peaceful coexistence, Maya announced over the noise. It's given us the tools we need to survive what's coming. But survival isn't enough. We're going to do more than just survive the Devourers. We're going to save them. The assembly fell silent. Admiral Corvex spoke first. Explain. Maya thought about her grandmother's wisdom about frightened animals, about how the most aggressive creatures were usually just scared and in pain. She thought about Echo's memories of the original catastrophe, the terror and desperation that had driven beings to attack anything they perceived as a threat. The Devourers aren't just destructive. They're addicted to the energy released by dimensional collapses. Like the shadow entities were addicted to fear energy, the Devourers have become dependent on destruction because it's the only way they know how to sustain themselves. Resonance created a mathematical model showing how dimensional collapse energy could be synthesized artificially, providing the Devourers with the sustenance they needed without requiring the destruction of inhabited realities. We can offer them an alternative. Clean energy sources that meet their needs without genocide. Treatment for their addiction to destruction. Integration support to help them find constructive ways to use their abilities. And if they refuse? Chancellor Xerix asked, his harmonic voice carrying skeptical undertones. Maya looked around the assembly at beings who had once been classified as monsters, enemies, and existential threats. Now they were friends, colleagues, and family members in a galactic community that was stronger because of their participation. Then, we'll do what we've always done, she replied. We'll find another way. Humans have a saying, there's no such thing as an enemy, only a friend you haven't figured out how to help yet. Echo's tentacles created spirals of pure joy as it projected the emotional certainty that Maya was right. Across the assembly, hundreds of beings that had once been lost, scared refugees began to believe that they could help save the very entities that had destroyed their homes. The next 5 years will be the most challenging in galactic history. But Maya knew they would also be the most transformative. The galaxy was about to face its greatest test, and they would meet it not with weapons and walls, but with open hands and open hearts. She had started as a failed academy candidate who couldn't even qualify for the lowest hunter classification. Now she stood at the center of a galactic community that had learned to turn its greatest fears into its greatest strengths. The Devourers were coming, but they would find a galaxy that had learned the most important lesson in the universe, that the strongest response to hatred and Fear was not greater hatred and fear, but understanding and compassion that could transform enemies into family. Maya looked out at the assembly one more time, feeling the weight of responsibility and the lightness of hope in equal measure. In the front row, Dr. Tanaka sat beside the entity that had once cost her an arm, but now gave her capabilities beyond anything she had imagined possible. Admiral Korvex discussed strategy with shadow entities that helped him process the trauma of a lifetime of warfare. Chancellor Xerix showed holographic blueprints to crystalline builders who were helping redesign his civilization's architecture around principles of beauty and harmony. Everywhere Maya looked, she saw the impossible made routine. Enemies who had become friends, monsters who had become neighbors, strangers who had become family. The integration initiative had succeeded beyond her wildest dreams. But, more than that, it had proved something that every human instinctively knew, but the rest of the galaxy had forgotten: that the universe was vast enough for everyone, if they could just learn to share it. Maya smiled as she watched Echo playing with resonance and Whisper, three beings from different dimensions and realities who had found in each other the friendship and acceptance they had never expected to experience again. Their joy was infectious, spreading through empathic links and crystalline harmonics and shadow patterns to touch every being in the assembly. The failed Academy candidate had become something the Academy had never even dreamed of producing. Not just a hunter of monsters, but a builder of bridges. Not just a protector of the galaxy, but a teacher who had shown an entire civilization how to protect itself by learning to love instead of fear. The Devourers were coming, but Maya-chan was ready for them. And, more importantly, so was everyone else.